One of the big types of idolatry that is part of Judaism is the whole cherubim business. These were essentially two graven images, two idols that were created, one to represent Israel and the other to represent God. And there are many problematic things that come with that, other than it being, of course, a graven image, an idol, essentially. Not only that, but we find that these were the two cherubim, one representing God, the other representing Israel, or sometimes in a sexual position. And we also find that Jews were taught to pray toward the Ark of the Covenant, which had the cherubim on them, as well as we find, for example, Joshua bowing towards the Ark of the Covenant with the cherubim in the Bible. So imagine you make an idol out of God, you make him into a sexual image, or every now and then they get into a sexual image or a sexual position, and then you actually pray towards the direction of where this idol or image is. That is obviously major polytheism. So let's get into that by looking at the sources. The first thing we'll do is we'll establish the cherubim are in fact graven images, one of which represents God. So here in the Talmud you can see when the Jewish people would ascend for one of the pilgrimage festivals, the priest would roll up the curtain for them and show them the cherubs, which were clinging to one another, and say to them, "See how you are beloved before God, like the love of a male and a female." The two cherubs symbolize the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Jewish people. So you have these two statues, and we'll see what these look like later on. But essentially, one of them is symbolizing, it's being represented by the Holy One, blessed be He, God, and the other, the Jewish people, according to the Talmud, and they're in a clinging relationship with each other, such as the relationship of a man and a woman. Again here, pay attention to the fact that one of the cherubs is symbolizing God. They literally state that here when they say the two cherubs symbolize the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Jewish people. And even if you take out that text, the fact that the cherubs, their relationship, them clinging to one another, is representing God and Israel. So obviously one of the cherub is representing God, and that proves it is in fact an idol, because it is an image, a graven image, and it's in a way representing God. It's not a depiction of his image, but it is a representation of him. It is supposed to symbolize him. So yes, it is an idol. So here you can see Aish.com, Orthodox Jewish website, an article, the cherubim versus idols, and they mention here to the questioner, "You are right that the cherubim of the temple appear to us as graven images, the type the Torah forbids in all other circumstances." So they are in fact these graven images. However, they were permitted. So then they just say, okay, but these were an exception, these were permitted. In fact, the Midrash, as they say here, Exodus 20:20, the Midrash of Exodus 20:20 understands, "Do not make me gods of silver or gods of gold, do not make them for you," as a specific injunction against making cherubim anywhere else, or making them differently even in the temple, as Mechlita 10 brought in Rashi there. The cherubim had to be exactly the way they were, or the Torah considered it idolatry. So the fact that the rabbis acknowledged that if you made another cherubim, if you made it just slightly different, it would become idolatry, shows that they knew that these cherubim are idols. And then they're just saying, well, these are just exceptions, and God ordained them for us. But of course, a Hindu worshiper, anyone who worships idols, is going to say, well, these idols are our intercessors with God. These are our intercessors with God. We're not saying you can worship any idol, but these specific idols, God has said that we can worship them. These are our intercessors. We just use them to get close to God, etc. These types of things. And of course, they are not actually worshiping the idols either. They just believe that these are representations, or just help them channel their worship or whatever. Very similar to what we find here, these images being made, and then said, oh yeah, but God decreed this, to try and say it's all right. Well, the others would also say God decreed this. That's not really much of an excuse. Anyway, let's read on in the article here. The sages teach us that the cherubim of the ark symbolized God's relationship with Israel, One cherub represented God and the other Israel. So you see there, one of the cherubs is representing God. So it is an idol. When the nation was serving God devoutly, the two cherubim would face each other. When they were rebellious, they would turn away from one another. That is mentioned in Baba Betra 99a in the Talmud. In fact, when the nation used to ascend to the temple for the holidays in ancient times, the priests would display the cherubim hugging each other to show the people how much God loved them. Talmud Yoma 54a. So here they've interpreted the fact that they were clinging to one another like a man and a woman, as if they were hugging. But if we actually go to the end of the narration, it does not seem like they are hugging. So it says here, it means like a man joined in clinging to his Levaya, his partner, his wife. In other words, the cherubs appear to be embracing one another. Reish Lakish said, when Gentiles destroyed the second temple and entered the sanctuary, they saw the drawings of cherubs clinging to one another. They peeled them from the wall, took them out to the market, and said, these Jews, whose blessing is a blessing and whose curse is a curse, due to their great fear of God, should they be occupied with such matters, making images of this kind, they immediately debased them and destroyed them, as it is said, all who honored her debase her, because they have seen her nakedness. Lamentations 1:8. So here the Romans, clearly very offended by the cherubim, how they were clinging to one another, which actually shows us that it seems to be a more sexual embrace, not just hugging, because why would they have a problem with hugging? Remember, this is when the Gentiles destroyed the second temple, so these are the Romans who came and destroyed it. And remember, the Romans were pagans. They didn't care about if you had idols or images. They used to have those types of things. They're obviously offended because it's more sexual, right? There's no reason for them to be offended because it's images. If they're hugging as well, why would they be offended by that? So there's a big indication right there that it's sexual. And that is one of the legitimate interpretations put forth. So for example, Torah.com on what kind of creatures are the cherubim, write this as well, that in the Talmudic passage here, it is an erotic aspect. There is an erotic aspect to the cherubim of the Jerusalem temple. Also, here is an academic article, cherubim representing transcendence. And here they mention that in the Zohar, you have sort of backed up this interpretation that it's sexual. So it seems that the Zohar seems to support that idea. And remember, Zohar is considered to be revelation in oral Torah by them. So what the Zohar says, how the Zohar interprets it, that is the more authentic, or I should not say authentic, but I should say authoritative understanding. So here they quote Zohar 2:278a, the cherubs, when Israel was with merit, were face to face, entwined with each other. Look at that, entwined with each other. And when they lacked merit, they would turn their faces away from each other. Now I asked a scholar of the Zohar, is it really a sexual implication in the Zohar? And he confirms that. So Daniel C. Matt, he's a scholar of the Zohar. I asked him to confirm this. Look what he says in the email. The Talmudic passage does imply a sexual embrace. The Zohar sometimes implies this as well and sometimes does not. So he is a scholar of the Zohar, and he mentions that sometimes the Zohar does imply that the cherubim had a sexual embrace. And so if the Zohar says it, and that is an interpretation that seems to be correct of the Talmud anyway, and then the Zohar, which is considered to be oral Torah by them, confirms it. And remember, everyone, including Tovia Singer and these people, believe this about the Zohar, that is, it is oral Torah, etc. If the Zohar implies it, then that is the correct interpretation for a Jew who believes in the Zohar. So we're also already seeing big problems here. Two graven images being made, one of them being said to represent God, then the sexual imagery, right? So we have idols, and then we have them in a sexual pose. Now we have something even more problematic, but I should say another problematic aspect to this. We find Joshua 7:6. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. So now we have Joshua and the Israelites falling face down before the ark. And remember, it is the ark that had the cherubim on on them. So here you can see an image of the Ark of the Covenant, and these ones at the top, yeah, these are the cherubim. So imagine, essentially falling face down before them, you Joshua as a prophet, and all of Israel together. And of course, we as Muslims do not believe Joshua would do any type of idolatry. We believe he was a prophet, but this is what they believe. Not only that, but according to the Talmud, the Jews used to pray towards the Ark of the Covenant. So we know in Islam that they used to pray towards Masjid al-Aqsa, but according to the Talmud, they would not only pray towards the temple, but specifically towards the Ark of the Covenant. So here they mentioned that anyone who is not in Israel should be, focusing towards the land of Israel. That is where they should face. If you're in the land of Israel, or then you face Jerusalem. If you're in Jerusalem, you face towards the temple. If you're in the temple, you face towards the place of the Holy of Holies. And if you're standing in the Holy of Holies, you should focus your heart towards the seat of the ark cover. So atop the ark, which is what they say is where the dwelling place of God's glory is, right? And so one who is standing behind the seat of the ark cover should visualize himself as if standing before the ark cover and turn towards it. So you're supposed to turn towards the Ark of the Covenant. And you see here, this is how sort of this would look if we think about Joshua bowing or falling face down towards the Ark of the Covenant, or we think about Jews praying in the direction of the ark, which hosted these cherubim on top of them. And so you see in the middle here this sort of light between the cherubim. That's supposed to be Shekhinah. That's what's meant by the dwelling place of God's glory. That's where they say the Shekhinah, which they say is God's glory. So it was manifested as sort of this light between the cherubim. But you can see, obviously, this is very problematic and idolatrous right there, right? So not only do you have two graven images, one of them which you're labeling God, and you admit that if there was another one of these, it would become idolatry, which shows it's idolatry. Then you have them in sometimes a sexual pose. And then you have bowing before them, facing them when you're praying. And when you add to that the other problems we've discussed about Judaism, like a very human type of God that plays and rests and refreshes and regrets and studies Torah and wears tefillin and regrets and gets confused and cries and these sorts of things. And now we have sort of making idols out of God, making an idol out of God. And whenever you pray 3 times a day, Jews pray, you're facing towards this idol. That seems extremely problematic. Allah says in the Quran, ألم تر إلى الذين أوتوا نصيبا من الكتاب يؤمنون بالجبت والطاغوت ويقولون للذين كفروا هؤلاء أحدى من الذين آمنوا سبيلا. Have you not seen those who are given a portion of the scripture who believe in superstition and false gods and say about the disbelievers, these are better guided than the believers as to the way? So Allah mentioning in the Quran the belief of the Jews and Christians in false gods.